This is the Life Shadows channel, and today we bring you the Elisa Lam case in the Cecil Hotel. Imagine a place where the walls hold echoes of nearly a century of tragedies. A place where evil doesn't just happen, it resides. Where darkness doesn't visit, it lives there. In the heart of Los Angeles, wedged between the glittering lights of the metropolis and the shadows of one of the most destitute neighborhoods in the United States, stands the Cecil Hotel. To most people who pass it, it's just an old building, another gray brick on the urban horizon. To Elisa Lam, a 21-year-old Canadian student searching for adventure in herself, it was her final destination. What began as a journey of self-discovery ended in a sealed water tank on the hotel rooftop. It ended in a security camera video that, when released by police, paralyzed the internet and generated more questions than answers. It ended in a mystery that, more than a decade later, continues to watch us from the depths and forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. Not about ghosts or serial killers, but about mental health, loneliness, and what it costs to be alone in a city that doesn't know your name. This is the Elisa Lam case. And to understand it, we first need to understand the place that made it possible. Act 1, a magnet for darkness, the Cecil Hotel. The Cecil Hotel opened in 1924, at a moment when Los Angeles still believed in its own myth. It was designed to be the pinnacle of luxury: marble lobby, high windows, an address that communicated status and ambition. Architect Lester Smith designed a 700-room building intended to receive the traveling elite arriving in Southern California. A monument to post-war American optimism, brick by brick. The optimism didn't last. The Great Depression hit. The neighborhood deteriorated. The clientele changed. What had once been executives and families became unemployed workers, aimless migrants, and people the city had simply forgotten. The Cecil transformed into a low-cost hotel in a neighborhood that was rapidly circling the drain. And then the bodies started appearing. Over the decades, the Cecil accumulated a death toll that would have closed any other establishment. These weren't just deaths, they were tragedies with bizarre signatures, each more disturbing than the last. In 1947, Elizabeth Short, the famous Black Dahlia, was reportedly seen drinking in the Cecil's bar just days before being found cut in half in a vacant lot across Los Angeles. Her case was never solved. In 1962, a woman named Pauline Otten jumped from a 9th-floor window, landing directly on a pedestrian walking on the sidewalk below. 2 bodies. 1 fall. In 1975, a 65-year-old woman named Goldie Osgood, nicknamed Pigeon Lady by neighborhood residents who knew her from feeding birds on the street, was found raped and murdered inside her own Cecil room. No one was ever held accountable. And there were the suicides. Many. So many that neighborhood locals had an unofficial name for the Cecil, the Suicide Hotel. People who had reached the end of their rope chose that building for their final moments. Whether it was the desolation of the place that drew them, or simple geographic coincidence, is uncertain. The hotel sat precisely on the edge of Skid Row, the largest concentration of homeless individuals in the United States, a neighborhood where despair is so tangible you can feel it in the air. But the Cecil wasn't just the backdrop for random tragedies. It was also temporary home to monsters. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, the serial killer who terrorized California between 1984 and 1985, responsible for at least 14 murders, used a room on the Cecil's 14th floor as a base of operations. He went out at night to hunt his victims and returned to the hotel before dawn. According to accounts, he discarded his bloodied clothing in the dumpsters in the hotel's back alley. Other guests noticed the strange smells, the sounds, the presence of the odd man who came up the hallway in the early morning hours. Nobody asked questions. Because at the Cecil, asking questions about your neighbors wasn't part of the culture. Years later, in 1991, an Austrian man named Jack Unterweger checked into the Cecil. Unterweger was a celebrated writer in Europe, a redemption story the media had loved. Sentenced to life imprisonment in Austria for murdering a young woman at age 19, he wrote an autobiographical book in prison that became a bestseller, was adapted into a stage play, and attracted the support of intellectuals who campaigned for his release. He walked out of prison in 1990. In 1991, he came to Los Angeles on assignment from a magazine to write a piece about street crime. While researching his article on Skid Row criminality, he murdered 3 prostitutes in the area, using the same signature method he had used in Austria. It was no coincidence that he chose the Cecil. The Cecil Hotel wasn't just a building. It was an entity. A place with memory and, if you believe in that sort of thing, with intention. A gravitational field for the darkest currents of human nature. And it was into this field that Elisa Lam walked with her backpack, her travel plans, and a soul already carrying its own battles. Act 2, The Digital Diary, The Mind of Elisa. Before we talk about what happened, we need to talk about who Elisa Lam was. Because in this case, understanding the person is the key to understanding the mystery. Elisa Lam was 21 years old and studying at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. She was the daughter of Hong Kong immigrants. On the outside, she was a young woman like many others, studious, curious, passionate about fashion, books, and the idea that the world was bigger than the neighborhood where you grew up. On the inside, Elisa was fighting a silent war. She had bipolar disorder, a diagnosis that, for those who haven't experienced it up close, sounds like a clinical label, but in real life means emotional swings that no one on the outside can fully see. Bipolar disorder doesn't transform a person, it amplifies. It amplifies joy until it becomes euphoria that won't let you sleep. It amplifies fear until it becomes paranoia that won't let you leave the house. It amplifies creativity until it becomes a torrent of thoughts that never stops. Elisa channeled all of this into her Tumblr blog, which she called Nouvelle Nouveau. It was her most honest space. She wrote about books she loved, about aesthetics, about fashion, but also, with a rawness that moved those who read it, about her mental health. About the days when getting out of bed felt impossible. About the sensation of being disconnected from her own body. About the difficulty of explaining to those around her what she was feeling when she couldn't name it herself. She wrote about what she called the price of appearing well. About how bipolar disorder is invisible in the most treacherous way. On bad days, you seem strange. On good days, you seem completely functional. And society tends to grab onto the functional version to conclude that you're cured or that you exaggerated when you described the bad days. Elisa knew this. She wrote about it with exhaustion and with humor, both at once, which is one of the most recognizable forms of emotional survival there is. Some of her most shared posts were about loneliness. About the duality of wanting to be around people and simultaneously needing to get away from them. About traveling as a way of escaping herself, knowing that the heaviest luggage you carry through an airport is always the bag that never shows up on the conveyor belt. The trip up the west coast of the United States was what she called her West Coast tour. A carefully planned journey starting in Los Angeles, passing through San Diego and ending in Santa Cruz. She was looking for something, peace, perspective, the feeling of being small in a large world, which is sometimes exactly what the mind needs to breathe. Her parents, practical and worried Hong Kong immigrants, gave permission under a single condition: she had to call home every day. It wasn't over control, it was the only way they had of knowing their daughter was safe in a foreign country. And Elisa complied. She called every day, without fail. Until February 1st, 2013. That morning, the phone in Burnaby, Canada, simply didn't ring. There was no text message. There was no Tumblr post. The digital silence of Elisa Lam was the first sign that something had gone terribly wrong inside the corridors of the Cecil Hotel. Act 3, Check-in at the Abyss. Elisa checked into the Cecil Hotel on January 28, 2013. She wasn't staying in one of the expensive rooms. The Cecil had been trying to reinvent itself in previous years, operating part of the building under the brand Stay on Main, a hostel-style section aimed at young backpackers and budget travelers, with lower rates and a more modern aesthetic. That's where Elisa was, a shared room on the 5th floor. The Stay on Main website sold an image of a hip, modern hotel in the center of Los Angeles. What the photos didn't show was what was outside the front door, Skid Row. A few blocks from the lobby, thousands of people lived in tents on the sidewalks, many of them with untreated mental disorders, substance dependency, and histories of systematic abandonment by the system. It was a reality that shocked even longtime Los Angeles residents. For a 21-year-old Canadian woman with a history of bipolar disorder, staying on the edge of that world was a variable that no booking platform mentioned. Within days, the situation in the shared room started to deteriorate. Elisa's roommates went to management with complaints about her behavior. They described disturbing episodes, Elisa locking the door from the inside at random hours, preventing the others from entering. Notes left on roommates' beds with aggressive language, asking, or demanding, that they leave. Erratic behavior that didn't match the composed image she projected on her blog. Hotel management made a decision. They moved Elisa to a private room. A solution on paper. In practice, an isolation. Outside the hotel, witnesses from that week paint a portrait full of contradictions. She was seen being escorted out of a TV show taping in the area. The exact reason was never clarified, but something was happening that made her visible in the wrong way. In contrast, at a bookstore called The Last Bookstore, a few blocks from the hotel, staff described her as vibrant, radiant, buying books and gifts to send back to her family in Vancouver. She was happy. She was present. She was being the traveler she wanted to be. This duality, the euphoria of discovery and the instability of a mind in transition, is characteristic of bipolar disorder during a shifting phase. And it was about to collide with a situation that no one, not Elisa, not her family, not the hotel staff, recognized in time. Here is a question that rarely gets asked about this case. What should the hotel have done? Elisa had exhibited behaviors that generated formal complaints from other guests. She left aggressive notes, repeatedly locked doors, was removed from a public space for causing a disturbance. Rather than activating any form of support, calling a doctor, contacting her family, simply asking if she was okay, management moved her to a private room. They solved the operational problem. They ignored the human one. This isn't an accusation. It's an observation. Hotels aren't psychiatric clinics. Front desk staff aren't trained to identify mental health episodes. But when a 21-year-old woman, alone in a foreign country, exhibits behaviors that go beyond eccentricity, when the signs are clearly there, a responsive change her room is not enough. Elisa was becoming more isolated. More alone. In a hotel whose history weighed on the walls. In a city that didn't know her. With a mind that, without the anchor of her medication, was beginning to build its own reality. Act 4, 2 minutes and 59 seconds, the elevator video. Elisa was last seen alive on January 31, 2013. She didn't return to her room that night. The next morning, when she was supposed to call her parents, she didn't call. When she was supposed to check out and head to Santa Cruz, she didn't go. Hotel management checked the room, empty. Her belongings were still there, but Elisa had vanished. Her family called the police. The LAPD opened a missing persons case. Investigators visited the hotel, interviewed staff and guests. Security cameras were reviewed. And that's when they found what is, to this day, one of the most unsettling videos ever released in a missing persons case. On February 15th, with Elisa missing for 2 weeks, the LAPD posted the footage on their YouTube channel asking the public for information about her whereabouts. It was 2 minutes and 59 seconds of recording from one of the Cecil's elevator security cameras. What those 2 minutes and 59 seconds show is difficult to describe without losing something, so let's go slowly. Elisa enters the elevator. She's wearing a red jacket. She presses multiple buttons at the same time, as if she wants to go to several floors at once, or as if she's desperately trying to get the doors to close. The doors don't close. She goes to the corner of the elevator and huddles there, as if she's hiding from someone in the corridor. She sticks her head out, looks both ways with rapid, almost mechanical movements. Her eyes scan the hallway as if she's looking for something, or fleeing from something. Then she steps out of the elevator completely. And here is the part that stopped the world. In the hallway, in front of the open elevator doors, Elisa begins making hand movements that have no obvious explanation. She extends her arms, rotates her wrists, moves her fingers in a pattern that some people described as swimming through air. She appears to be speaking to someone. But there is no one visible in the frame. At some point, she seems to point at something outside the camera's field of view. Her lips move. The elevator remains open. Waiting. After a few minutes, Elisa disappears to the left of the frame. The elevator finally closes its doors and departs. Elisa Lam was never seen alive again. The video was watched millions of times. And what's fascinating and disturbing is that different people saw completely different things. Those familiar with mental health recognized a young woman in a possible psychotic episode, dissociated from reality, responding to stimuli that only she perceived. Those inclined toward conspiracy saw someone fleeing a pursuer who knew exactly where the camera's blind spots were. Those with a supernatural inclination saw an encounter with something cameras can't capture. The LAPD was equally at a loss. The door to the hotel's rooftop was supposedly locked and alarmed. There were no records of anyone using that door in the preceding days. No unusual fingerprints. Nothing that explained how Elisa got to where she was found, or why. But here's what the video doesn't show, and what's just as important as what it does show: there is no one else. In no frame, from no angle, is there a second person. No shadow, no reflection, no movement in the corridor that suggests another human presence. That matters because the pursuer theory, that Elisa was fleeing someone who knew the camera blind spots, would require impressive logistical coordination across a hotel with cameras throughout multiple floors. The hardest theory to accept is usually the simplest one: Elisa was alone. And what she saw in that corridor wasn't there. Act 5, The Taste of Dark Water. While the internet debated the elevator video and forums exploded with theories, the guests of the Cecil Hotel were living a horror of a much more concrete, and much more nauseating, nature. In the days following Elisa's disappearance, rooms throughout the hotel began reporting a problem with the water supply. First it was the pressure. It dropped dramatically, leaving showers to a trickle. Then came the color. When guests turned on their faucets, what came out wasn't clean water. It was a liquid with a dark hue, somewhere between brown and black, with a slightly viscous consistency that didn't seem normal. Some guests reported something worse: a taste. They described the water as having a quality that was strangely sweet, sometimes with a metallic edge they tried to attribute to the building's old plumbing. Nobody imagined that the explanation was a few dozen meters above their heads. On February 19, 2013, 19 days after Elisa's disappearance, a maintenance worker named Santiago Lopez was sent to the roof to check the water tanks. The supply system had been having persistent problems and management needed to understand why. The Cecil's roof had 4 fiberglass tanks, each with a capacity of approximately 1,000 gallons. They supplied running water to all the hotel's rooms. Santiago climbed the iron ladder to the top of the tanks. He opened the heavy lid of the first one. He looked inside. Elisa Lam was there, floating face up, in an advanced state of decomposition. She was unclothed. Her clothes, the same ones she wore in the elevator video, the red jacket, were folded at the bottom of the tank, along with her room key and her wristwatch. The scene was so grotesque that Santiago Lopez fled the rooftop unable to form coherent words. When police arrived and confirmed the identity, the full extent of the horror became public. For 19 days, guests of the Cecil Hotel, including Elisa's own family, who had been staying at the hotel to assist in the search, had been drinking, cooking with, and bathing in water that contained a decomposing body. Local and international media exploded. It surpassed any horror script Hollywood could write, not because it was supernatural, but because it was real. Act 6, The Autopsy and the Theories. Finding the body didn't close the Elisa Lam case. It launched a storm of speculation that, in the age of internet forums and true crime communities, grew to proportions that Elisa's family would later describe as a second victimization. The questions were, to a point, legitimate. How did she get to the roof? The rooftop access doors were supposedly protected by alarms that would alert the front desk if opened. How did she climb into a tank nearly 10 feet high without a visible ladder? And the question that circulated the most, how was the tank lid closed from the outside, if Elisa was inside? Reddit found the case and dove in headfirst. Entire forums were dedicated to breaking down every frame of the elevator video. Amateur investigators pointed to pixels, to shadows, to the timing of the doors. They built elaborate theories about a phantom killer, a hotel employee involved, an LAPD cover-up. The coincidences that the internet loved to catalog appeared. A tuberculosis outbreak was happening in Skid Row at the time, and the most used diagnostic test kit was called Lam Elisa. A 2005 film called Dark Water told the story of a girl whose body was found in the water tank of a residential building. In the film, the building was called Cecilia. These coincidences proved absolutely nothing. But in the logic of conspiracy forums, the absence of explanation is treated as evidence of a cover-up. The autopsy, conducted by the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office, was the moment when facts began to push back against theories. There were no signs of external physical trauma. No fractures, no significant bruising, no strangulation marks, no evidence of sexual violence. The state of the body's decomposition was consistent with 19 days in water. The toxicology report found the medications Elisa used to treat her bipolar disorder, but in irregular concentrations, suggesting she had interrupted or altered her dosage in the days before her death. This is clinically significant. The abrupt discontinuation of mood stabilizers can trigger severe episodes of mania or psychosis. No recreational drugs were in her system. No significant alcohol. There was a young woman whose brain, in those days, was operating without the chemical anchor that kept it stable. The official ruling from the coroner, accidental drowning. Contributing cause, bipolar disorder. Elisa's family contested the ruling. They stated publicly that Elisa was disciplined with her medication, that there was no reason she would have interrupted her treatment. But prescription tracking records told a different story. The mystery of the closed tank lid, the detail that most fueled murder theories, was clarified by Santiago Lopez himself years later, in interviews for the Netflix documentary about the case. He found the lid open, not closed. The confusion came from a poorly worded police report that used ambiguous language, and the internet turned that ambiguity into certainty. The alarm doors, subsequent investigations revealed that the rooftop door alarms had been deactivated during that period to facilitate maintenance work, a banal bureaucratic decision that, combined with the tragedy, seems like part of a script. What was never fully answered, and likely never will be, is exactly how Elisa climbed up to the tank opening. The structure required some form of support for someone of her height. There may have been a bucket, a crate, some object that was removed or that fell into the tank with her. It may have been a superhuman effort from someone in a state of acute mania, states in which the body literally doesn't feel pain or fatigue in the normal way. There is no answer that closes every question. And perhaps there never will be. The Netflix documentary about the case, released in 2021 under the title Crime Scene: The Vanishing at the Cecil Hotel, brought the story to a new generation of viewers and reignited the debates. It also did something that few true crime productions do: it spent time listening to Elisa's family. Showing her parents, real people, middle-aged, with accented English and tired eyes, trying to process what happened to their daughter. It wasn't enough to give them peace. It rarely is. The documentary also exposed a disturbing side of the public's response to the case. Online amateur investigators, the so-called Reddit detectives, went so far as to accuse an independent metal musician of being responsible for Elisa's death, based on nothing more than the fact that he had been in Los Angeles at the same time and had a dark aesthetic on his Tumblr. The man received death threats. He had to disappear temporarily from social media. He was completely innocent. The Elisa Lam case is also a portrait of what happens when the impulse to solve a mystery overrides care for the real people who stand in the path of the theories. Act 7, The Anatomy of Tragedy, Verdict and Legacy. The most logical conclusion to this case is also the saddest. And it needs to be said carefully, because it involves a real person, with a real family, with a story that shouldn't be reduced to an internet mystery. Elisa Lam was most likely not killed by a murderer. She was most likely not the victim of a conspiracy. The elevator video, which seems supernatural to those unfamiliar with psychotic episodes, is recognizable to psychiatrists and psychologists as a pattern of behavior during acute dissociation or a manic episode with paranoid features. The hand movements, the hiding behavior, the conversation with an invisible presence, all of it has documented clinical correlates. The most plausible theory, supported by the toxicology report and the sequence of events, goes like this: Elisa interrupted or reduced her medication during the trip. This may have been by choice. Many people with bipolar disorder stop their medication when they feel well, because the medications have side effects that interfere with quality of life, and feeling well creates a false sense that treatment is no longer necessary. It may also have been through progressive forgetting or disorientation. Without her medication, Elisa entered a state of mania or psychosis. The behavior with her roommates, the notes, the locked doors, was a sign. The elevator video was another sign, far more obvious. In that state, Elisa's mind was operating in a reality that wasn't the physical one. She may have seen the rooftop as a place of escape or safety. She may have entered the tank voluntarily, seeking to hide from something only she perceived. The tragedy of the Elisa Lam case is not an unidentified murderer. The tragedy is a system that failed repeatedly. A hotel that knew she was in distress and didn't call professional help. The absence of any protocol to identify and support guests in a mental health crisis. A solo trip in a mental state that required companionship and oversight. A rooftop door with deactivated alarms. A tank without adequate security locks. None of these failures is a crime. But together, they form the path that led Elisa Lam to the bottom of that tank. The Cecil Hotel closed in 2017 for an extensive renovation. When it reopened, it was transformed into affordable housing managed by the city of Los Angeles, a conclusion with a certain poetic justice for a location that spent decades as witness to marginalization. But the fame, or the curse, depending on what you call it, wasn't renovated along with the building. The Cecil continues to be visited by tourists on crime tours, by filmmakers seeking atmosphere, and by young people posting rooftop photos on social media as if it were just another landmark. Elisa Lam left behind an extraordinarily honest digital footprint. The Nouvelle Nouveau blog remains online, kept up by her family as a memorial. Those who read the posts today read them with the weight of what came after, but also with clarity about who that young woman was before she became a mystery. She was funny. She was sharp. She had strong opinions about bad books. She loved the aesthetics of past decades. She wrote about depression with the honesty of someone who had tried for a long time to explain something that most people prefer not to see. One of her most shared posts was about what she called the loneliness of being well enough to function but too unwell to connect. For those who know bipolar disorder up close, that phrase is a perfect portrait of what the illness does to human relationships. You smile. You go out. You buy gifts at a bookstore. And inside, something is completely adrift. She was a person. With a life. With a future that never happened. In the depths of the Cecil's tanks, there was more than dark water. There was the end of a story that began in a small Canadian city with a girl who wanted to see the world. Channel outro. If you made it to the end of this video, you felt the weight of this case. The Elisa Lam case teaches us that the most dangerous monsters don't necessarily live in the dark corridors of cursed hotels. Sometimes the danger lives inside us, in a chemical imbalance we didn't choose to have, in a system that doesn't see what's happening right in front of it. Elisa was searching for freedom. She found a place where no one was looking. What do you think about this case? Is the elevator video, for you, a clear sign of a psychotic episode, or is there still something in those images that the official explanation can't fully account for? Leave your thoughts in the comments. On the next episode, we'll descend into another abyss. Until then, look after your mind, and the minds of the people around you.